All right, so now that we've moved all of our note data into a context provider, the next thing we're going to do is see how to allow ourselves to create new notes. All right, now the first step in this, of course, is going to be actually adding a button for that. And to do that, we're going to go into our notes page, which is right here, and we're going to add a button underneath our My Notes list. And actually, we're going to delete this Shared With Me list since that's not going to be a part of our application quite yet. All right, that'll come after we actually add user authentication, that kind of thing to our app. And what we're going to do now is this button is going to say create, or you know what, we'll say add a new note with the little plus sign in front of it, because for some reason that's what new buttons always look like in websites. And what we're going to want this button to do, and if you recall from when I first sketched out the basic flow of our app, what we're going to want this button to do is not immediately create a new note, but instead we're going to want it to display a modal that asks the user for the name of the new note, right? So that whatever the title should be. So what this is going to have to do, and we're going to have to create a modal component for this, which should be pretty straightforward. We're going to create a modal component that will look something like this. It'll just have a text input and a button. The text input will take the title of the new note, and this button will actually be what triggers the creation of that new note. Okay, so right away, let's create a new modal component here. Inside our components folder, we're going to say new file. We're going to create a file called modal.js. And this modal component is going to look pretty similar to the modal that we've created elsewhere in other videos. But just in case you haven't seen those, I'm going to just walk you through real quick how this is going to work. So we're going to say export const modal. And this modal is going to take a few props. The first one being a prop that specifies whether or not the modal is currently visible. Right? We can actually change this to something like is open. And we're also going to add an onRequestClose prop, which the modal will call when the user does something that should cause the modal to close. All right, so the idea with this modal is that it's a controlled modal. That's just the term for it in React. It's a controlled modal, which means that its parent component is going to be the one that takes care of displaying it and not displaying it. So we have isOpen onRequestClose. The last prop that we're going to need to get is the children prop. And this children prop is going to allow us to pass children to the modal inside the JSX tags. You'll see what that looks like in a minute when we use it. But basically what we're going to do is if the isOpen prop is false, right? So if not isOpen, we're going to just return null from this component, so nothing will be rendered whatsoever. Otherwise, what we're going to do is display our modal component with the children inside of it. This is going to be the first time that we add some styling to our app, because this is going to have to actually look good in order to be a modal. We're going to say div, and we're going to give this div a class name. Now, the class name of this div is going to be modal background, and this will be the sort of black or dark gray backdrop that this modal will have while it's open, right? Letting the user know that they can't interact with the rest of the page at that time. Now, after that, we're also going to say onClick, and when this modal background element is clicked, it's going to call this onRequestClose prop that's being passed to it from its parent component. So we'll say onClick. This is going to say onRequestClose. We're just going to pass that directly through, and that's our div. Okay, so again, that div is going to be the dark gray background of our modal, and I'm drawing it in white here because I'm already on a dark background, but essentially that's going to be this part here behind the modal. And when the user clicks on it, it's going to close the modal. That's just some basic functionality that most modals on most websites have. Okay, now inside this div, we're going to display the modal body. That's going to be the actual container of the modal content. And for this one, we're going to use a div as well. The class name of this one is going to be modal body. And when this one is clicked, what we're going to do is say e and say event.stop propagation. What that will do is it'll keep events inside the modal, like clicks, from propagating up and affecting components outside the modal. This is a problem, as you might recall, when we first took a look at modals in React. If you haven't seen that, that's why I'm going through it here. So anyway, that's going to be the modal body container. Inside here now is where we're actually going to start to display the content. Now, the first thing we're going to display here is going to be the top bar of the modal body. This is going to be where we actually have a button to close the modal, right? So eventually we'll make this a nice little X button like that. For the time being, we're just going to have a button that'll say close on it. And this will be the element that we're displaying, right? The top bar, so to speak, of our modal container. So we're going to have a div for that, just like with our others. And the class name of this div is going to be modal top bar. And inside here, as I said, we're going to have a button that will say close, and that will call the onRequestClose prop when it's clicked. So we'll say onClick, onRequestClose. And that should work out nicely. All right, now the only other thing we have to do now that we have the modal top bar, etc., is underneath the modal top bar, we're going to display the children of the modal, and that should display all of the content that we've displayed inside the modal's JSX tags right here inside the modal. All right, so in order for all of this to look good, let's actually go and add these corresponding styles to our index.css. Now, since I've already walked through this in other videos, I'm just going to copy and paste those styles here. All right, I at least have the modal background and modal body. If you want those, you can just pause the video here and type these out. You can also copy them from GitHub if you want to and just paste them into your project. The other thing we're going to need is the modal top bar class that I created. And this one's going to be pretty simple. We're just going to say position relative, and we're going to say min height. We'll set that to something like 20 pixels. Now, the other thing, and I think I actually missed this, we're going to want to wrap this close button in its own div that will put it over on the top right-hand side. So for this, we're going to say div. We'll make the class name here something like modal close button. And what we're going to do for that is go into index.css. We're going to create that class here and say dot modal close button. And the position for that one is going to be absolute. That's why we set position relative on the top bar. And the top is going to be 0, and right is going to be 0. And that will put it in the top right-hand corner of our modal. All right, so let's take a look and see what this is going to look like so far. First of all, though, we have to actually display this modal from inside our notes page. So what we're going to do, we're going to have to add a state variable to our notes page component that will keep track of whether or not the modal is currently showing. So what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to import the useState React hook up here. And down here, we're going to say const show new note modal. Actually, let's change the name of that to something like new note modal is open. Just a little bit more descriptive in my opinion. And then we'll say set new note modal is open. Kind of a long function there, but it'll work. And that's going to be equal to useState, and the initial value for that will be false. All right, the modal is going to start off as hidden by default. So now that we have that, we're going to make this add a new note button actually set that new state variable to true. So we'll say button on click equals, and we're going to say inside of here set new note modal is open to true. And to display the modal now, what we're going to do is say modal like that. We're going to import that from its file up here, which was done automatically for me. And for the props, we're going to say is open. That's going to be new note modal is open. For on request close, what we're going to do is set this new note modal is open thing to false. So we'll say set new note modal is open false. And what we're going to do in order to get the children prop in the right place is just put opening and closing tags for this modal component. And inside of here, we'll say something like, I don't know, for now, we'll just say create note. Perfect. So if you want to see what this looks like so far, let's open it up in our browser. So our app is running already. Let's go back to our app and click on add a new note. And sure enough, what we'll see is our modal component will be displayed here with whatever JSX, whatever elements we put inside that modal's tags displayed here, right? And we also see this close button, which will close the modal. And if we click on the background here, that will close the modal as well. However, notice that if we click on content inside the modal, that will not close the modal because of that e.stop propagation thing that we did a little while ago. All right, if you want to remove that and see what happens, go ahead and do that. And just one last thing that I noticed while I was looking at it, let's actually add a border radius to our modal body. We're going to say border radius, and we'll do something like 8 pix here. Okay. So now that looks pretty darn nice if I do say so myself. And this is the modal component that we'll be using for not just creating a new note, but also doing things like deleting notes, and there will be other uses later on, as you'll see. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.